So today I'm super excited because I want to talk a little bit about being on message and being on mission. And for some of you, you might like, man, Eric, talks about this. Usually a couple times a year, we want to come around and visit this. And we've had kind of extensive growth in this campus in Gothenburg. And so I wanted to, for those of you who are kind of new to the Crossing, wanted to get you on board with what it is that we're trying to accomplish and maybe the why behind it. So our mission, should you choose to accept it, is to see people meet, follow, and love Jesus. Wow, most. I'm going to blame this one on the guys in the back. I'm going to tell Cody, hey, your mission, should you choose to accept it, did you get that part? Yeah, that's, okay. Because here's the thing, and here's in all honesty, some churches, when they start, all churches accept this mission when they start. But over time, they lose it. And they're off mission. And I don't think they intentionally try to do that. It's just a drift that happens over time. So they have a mission, they just haven't been on it for a long time. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, and we need to be reminded of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and the fact that there's an invitation to say, you can be involved in this mission, should you choose to accept it. And as Jesus followers, it's kind of like, really our response to that should be, well, yes, I accept it because I'm following Jesus, but this is our version of the Great Commission, to see people meet, follow, and love Jesus. To see people meet Jesus for the very first time, to accept Him as their Lord and their Savior, to experience forgiveness of sin for the very first time. And some of you in this room, and some of you certainly who are watching online, you would have the story of a gal that I listened to this last week as I listened to her testimony, where she grew up in utter chaos. She's like, we were not religious in any way. We didn't go to church in any way. It was just, and she was a younger sibling of, I think, seven siblings, and her dad passed away while she was really young, and so her mom was trying to raise 7 children by herself, and she's like, it was chaos. It was dark. Everything that you could imagine as her siblings got into those teenage years, she's like, there was sex going on in the house, in the other rooms. There was drugs going on. There was alcohol going on. Everything that you could possibly wrap your mind or even think of, it was going on in our house, and it was chaos. There was no discipline. There was no respect. There was anger. It was darkness and chaos. And she's like, I couldn't have told you that's what it was until now that I look back on it, because in the middle of it, you just think that must be the way everything's supposed to be, and I guess that's the way all households are. And you get a little bit older, and then you're trying to hide, right? And maybe that's you in this room this morning, or you watching online. You would say, you know what? There's something in me that wants to go to church. There's something in me that wants to connect with God, because maybe He could fix some things. Maybe He could rearrange, because there's something in me that says this isn't right and this isn't the way it should be. And I'm not experiencing any peace or any joy. And people are taking advantage of me, but I don't know any better, and I don't know any different. You see, This mission to see people meet Jesus for the first time, to see their lives put in the right order, in the right priority, and to see God speak into them of who He says they are and how beautiful He says they are and how gifted He says they are and what potential He says they are and the purpose He gives and just, injects and fuels into their life. And then learning what it means to follow and reprioritize and put the things that are super valuable to God and make those things super valuable to me, and to make the things that are of high priority to God high priority to me. And then learning why do I follow? Because I love Jesus, not because I have this guilt to follow, not because I'm being shamed into following. It's not behavior modification. The reason I follow is because I want to follow, not because I have to follow. I want to follow because I love Him. So this is our mission, should we choose as a church to accept it. You see, the church is God's agent of transformation personally, culturally, and globally. God is using His church as His vehicle to bring this message of transformation, this gospel message, to locally, to our state, to our nation, and globally, and seeing people's lives changed. You are sitting next to people, if you heard their story of what God has done in their life, you would just be blown out of your mind. And as each church does its work and seeing those lives changed, it impacts the culture. And all around the world, I love what Crawford Loritz says. He's like, the church represents the destination that culture needs to arrive. Like when the church is hitting on all cylinders, the church is operating in such a way that's so beautiful, it's so attractive, it's so irresistible, the culture is envious of it and is like, man, how can we do it that way? Those of you who love our nation and are very concerned for the future and health of our nation, the health of our nation mirrors the health of the church. In fact, I would say, and I would go so far to say, and I've said this before, our nation is exactly where the church has led it to be. Because as a whole, the health of the church in our nation is not very healthy. Because we have not chosen to be on mission. And it's why I want to talk about it, and I'm so passionate about it, because it's so important for us. You see, the church was launched to be an outward-facing movement that is on message and on mission. The church was launched to be an outward-facing movement that was to be on message and on mission. This is what's so extraordinary to me, and I don't even think I could tell you, and I have thought deeply about this, and I don't think I could even adequately tell you or describe to you the degree to which every single one of us has been impacted deeply by the church. And some of you are like, Eric, I didn't grow up in the church. Some of you are like, I walked away from the church. Some of you are like, the church impacted, and I haven't been impacted by the church at all. You have been profoundly impacted by the church. Do you understand? The church provides the strongest, and I would almost argue, the only argument for the dignity of individual and human rights. You're like, oh, time out. Eric, that's the way our nation has always, that's the way the world, isn't it self-evident even in our founding documents, that it's self-evident that we have these rights given to us by God. No, it is not self-evident. You have been taught that. And it is the long shadow of the value of Jesus that has been carried from generation to generation to generation to you by the church. And if the church hadn't brought that message and that mission to you, you wouldn't even think that way. You would think the way people in the first century thought, that I'm better than you, I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm wealthier than you, and I'm better looking than you, so I can look down on you. You have less value than me, so I can use you for anything I want to use you for. You have been profoundly impacted by the church and you don't even know it. Because that's the message that has come. In the first century, they wouldn't have even thought about, a second thought about, using someone else, yes. And as our nation moves away, it is sprinting away from a Judeo-Christian value system. As it sprints away, this will increase where people will not see other people with the same value. And the ones who always suffer when this happens, the ones who always suffer more than anyone else, is women and children. Always. This is astounding to me. Did you know that Christian philanthropy accounted for 70% of all American philanthropy at $300 billion in 2022? 70%. You take the church away, and we are a profoundly selfish nation. Did you know that Christians outgave the U.S. government in addressing global poverty in 2022? It's just like, we don't need the church. Really? I love what Philip Yancey says. He's like, those who condemn the church for its blind spots, and trust me, the church has its blind spots. And for those of you that are skeptical of the church, if I heard your story, I would be too. Listen, I was born going to church. In fact, I tell people I started going to church 9 months before I was born. So I've been church to death. And so consequently, I've seen the wonderful, beautiful things of church. I've seen the bad things of church. And I have personally experienced some of the ugliest stuff you couldn't even imagine. And I still love the church. Do we have blind spots? Yeah. But this is so interesting. Those who condemn the church for its blind spots do so by gospel principles. This is what's so interesting. Arguing for the very moral values that the gospel originally set loose in the world. In other words, there's something that someone doesn't like about the church, and so the thing that they don't like, the argument of what the church isn't doing, is actually gospel-centered arguments of why the church isn't doing this, and they should be. Little do they know those are actually values that the church set loose in the world from Jesus. Now, the church may not be getting those gospel values right, but to say that the church is irrelevant using values that have been set loose by the church is interesting. See, the role of government, and this isn't something to change, this is just the role of government. The role of government is to tell you how low can you go before, you know what, we're just going to have to put you in jail. The role of government is to tell you the bar at which you have to at least behave at this bar, and if you behave lower than this bar, we're just going to have to put you in jail. That's the role of government, is to keep you accountable to the line, to the lowest possible line before we're just going to have to lock you up and put you in jail. So my question is, who challenges people to live beyond the letter of the law? You're like, well, my parents do. Well, who's informing your parents? Well, wait a second here. I mean, my teachers want me to live above. They're trying to inspire me. Who's informing your teachers? Who is it that's going to challenge people to not be the lowest bar possible, but to live way higher than that, way beyond that? Who is going to come with that message? Who is on that mission? Who's going to inspire us to live not just for ourselves? Who instructs us to do the one thing that would change everything if everybody did it? Who instructs us to do the one thing that if everybody did this, man, it would be amazing. Love your neighbor as yourself. Something Jesus unleashed on the world. And more specifically, love your neighbor as I have loved you. See, Crossing, we are stewards of the church of our generation. We are stewards of this church for our generation. So what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with that stewardship? It's amazing to me, you know, and I get it. I mean, I've gone. You go through these lulls where you kind of get complacent. You kind of fall asleep. You just start going through the motions. You just start checking boxes. I mean, you're not really into it, or you know, it's like yeah. The church is always going to be there. It's good to go to church. You know, it's like. Yeah, but the church, I mean, there's something in us, and we don't realize we have an enemy that actually wants to keep us from engaging in the church. So there's someone that's actually actively trying to get us, you know, to not engage, to get out of the routine of being engaged in the church. But Paul didn't think like that at all. And so I just, for the rest of this message, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to inspire you, but the other part is I want to, if you're in that place of complacency, I wanted to come along and it may feel like a slap. It may feel like I'm getting up in your grill a little bit, but I'm just telling you, as a nation and as a church in this nation, our back is against the wall. We do not have time to just dink around. We don't have time to be complacent. And Paul certainly wasn't complacent. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 24, Paul says, and this is all in the context of Paul planting little ecclesias, little movements, little congregations, little assemblies all along the Mediterranean rim, all the way from Jerusalem. If I was showing you a map, it would go from way down here all the way around the Mediterranean rim, all the way up to Rome. Church after church after church after church that Paul planted. And in the process of doing that, Paul says, 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 5 different times, trying to stop me. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. I used to laugh when I was a youth pastor. The high school students were like, "Oh, but church is so boring. Being a Christian's so boring." I'm like, look, now back then church was boring, so I couldn't really go too far off that. I'm like, yeah, I agree. We should do church better. But anyway, hopefully the Crossie's trying. But to a degree, it's kind of like, yeah, it is what you choose for it to be. But I'm like, man, if being a Christian is boring, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. Because this doesn't sound boring to me. This sounds adventurous. I mean, this is, your mission, should you choose to accept it, adventurous. Right? He goes on, and I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and have often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep warm. Then besides all of this, in other words, besides all of this physical, things, obstacles that have come against me, and some of the have been from Mother Nature, and some have just been other people who have persecuted me. But all of this, besides all of this physical stuff that I bear the scars of in bringing you and you online, the church, I have the daily burden of my concerns for all the churches. This word in Greek is anxiety. I have anxiety about bringing you, the church, and the churches that I have planted. I experience anxiety for them because I want to see them grow. I want to see them on mission. I want to see them keep the message pure, to keep the main thing the main thing. I have the daily burden of, this is good anxiety, by the way, not the bad kind. Shouldn't have to take medicine for this. Burden of my concerns for all the churches. Who is weak without me feeling that weakness? In other words, when there's a church that's just kind of weak, there's a church that's struggling, man, I'm feeling that. With the condition of the church in America, and let's reduce it to Ruleville, do any of you have any anxiety about that? Do you have any burden about that? Do you have any feeling towards that? Who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger? In other words, I came and I gave them the true gospel that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And salvation and forgiveness of sin is found in Him and Him alone. And then others come along and they add to this gospel things that aren't true, like circumcision, which isn't something that we really add on to our gospel, thank goodness. But we add other stuff in it, and then we get into the weeds, and we spend all of our time in the weeds, and we don't keep the main thing, and then we're off mission. See, you and I are anxious about the things we value. I was listening to a speaker this last week that said this. It's like, yes, that's true. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's like, if every single Tootsie Roll manufacturer in the state, in the U.S. and around the world burnt down as we are right here, I could care less. Because I don't like Tootsie Rolls. I don't have any value on Tootsie Rolls whatsoever. So if they all burn down, yeah, that makes room for more Snickers. Now, my daughter-in-law, Molly, she likes Tootsie Rolls, so that might cause her some anxiety. But I don't value Tootsie Rolls, so no anxiety for me. See, we are anxious around the things that we value. So let me ask you this, and are you genuinely anxious about the growth of our church? And some of you are kind of like, oh, Eric just wants a bigger church. So let me define exactly what I'm talking about. Would it bother you if we went a year without anyone going public with their faith through baptism? Would that bother you? That's what I'm talking about with growth. A couple years ago, we did go a year without baptizing anyone, and it bugged me to death. It bothered me so bad because it's kind of like, that means we are not on mission. That means whatever it is that we're doing, we need to tweak it, we need to change it, we need to figure out how to engage this culture in such a way that, you know what, the message of Jesus is coming through loud and clear, because if it's coming through clear and we stay out of its way, it's so irresistible, there isn't anyone who wouldn't want it. So we've got to figure it out, and if it doesn't bother you, then is the level of value on it that it should be for you? Because it was for Paul. And here's the thing, most Christians are content to just consume, and I hate to say that, but it's true. Most Christians are just content to consume. And you know what? We are always going to be here, and we are always going to be open, and we are always going to, to minister to anyone who comes through those doors. But to come in and just, you know what? Consume, and here's what happens. I just watch this over and over and over again. If you make it a habit to just consume, you will begin to complain. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. You will complain because you're not actually in the fight. You're not in it. You haven't rolled up your sleeves, and you're not beside other people serving that are in it together. See, this next question is disturbing. So I'm following the advice of my wife, who is a blue-green temperament, and she's like, oh, Eric, you might want to give him a heads up on that. So those of you who are feelers, you're going to be okay. The purpose for this question is not for you to beat yourself up. The purpose of this question is for you to actually do some internalization of internal evaluation. Those of you who are reds, no problem. You're going to be like, I got it. If everyone was equally as involved as you are in this church, what would be the state of this church? If everyone was as equally as involved as you are in serving and giving, what would be the condition of your church? For some of you, you could just say, we'd be rocking it. For some of you, to be honest, you would say it wouldn't exist. Wouldn't have it. There would be no Crossing Fellowship in Gothenburg or Cozad. And let me just give one more caveat. Those of you who are new to the Crossing, I want you to consume for a while. So you've been here less than a year, you get a pass. But I want you to not pass forever. I want you to figure out, and if you're in a place where you're kind of like, this is my church, man, I'm on board, then I hope that you'll take the steps to get engaged. Because here's what happens when you consume over a long period of time. You start to complain, and they're not doing that, and it's interesting when the language we use, they aren't doing that, or they do a great job of reaching, but they don't do anything for those who are in the church, or they don't do anything for the older people in the church. And I've heard this a few times, and it's like, wow, that's interesting to me. Because I'm just thinking, like, right off the top of my head, I think, well, maybe they didn't hear about, maybe they didn't know about the worship and communion nights, or maybe they didn't know about the chili cook-offs, maybe they didn't hear about the soup cook-off, maybe they don't know anything about Mama Life, maybe they're not involved in the women's groups, or maybe they've never been to a women's even, maybe they didn't hear about it, maybe they didn't know there was men's groups that are meeting, and various ones, or couples groups, and maybe the married date night, maybe they just didn't see it on Facebook, or weren't here for the announcement to it, or the family fun days, or the weekly worship gatherings, or Catalyst Sunday nights, or Catalyst midweek, or young adults, or Kid Venture. Maybe they didn't hear, and on and on. It's like, maybe they didn't hear about that. And I get confused, because kind of like, when I hear they don't do that, it's like, well, who is they? Is they me? Is they the staff? Is they the leadership team? Who is they? Because this is, you are the church. You are your church. You are the church. So when to say they is like, it's not yours, you are your church. So Crossing, it's time to do something for this generation. It's time to do for this generation what a previous generation did for you, or what you wished a previous generation would have done for you. And our backs are against the wall as a church in this nation. And I get it. Nobody has time, but everybody makes time for the things they value. That's just the reality. And nobody has time to be involved, and I get that. We're busy people. But we make time for the things we value. So I unashamedly will tell you that you need a plan for how you are going to support your church financially and through serving. You're like, Eric, that's kind of harsh. But you know what? As a Jesus follower, we have been given the stewardship of the church for this generation. Let's not squander it. And we're only limited. We're only limited by what we can do financially, and those who will carry the torch and serve in different places. And I'm telling you what, if everybody would get on board to serve, you would only have to serve like once a month, once every other month. In fact, some of you are kind of like, I wish I could serve more. In fact, you just show up and serve whether you're scheduled to or not. So it's not overbearing. So our mission, should you choose to accept it, is to see people meet, follow, and love Jesus. Those of you who watch online and you're faithful in doing that, and there's reasons why you can't be here physically. Maybe you live in a different town. Maybe, physically you can't do that or whatever the reason might be, and it's totally legit. I'm telling you what, financially, maybe you're in a place where you're just like, I can't be there physically, but I can help fund it, and I hope you will. So here's what I would love for you to do, and those of you who have not been a part of the crossing for very long, you can fill this, you can do this if you want, but you don't have to. The rest of you, I would hope that you would. On your way out, you're going to be given a card, and on that card are some different places where you can serve. And here's my big ask for you. Would you be willing to say, okay, I'd be willing to serve between August to December. That's the time frame, just 3 months to serve. And you may only end up serving, depending on how you're scheduled and as much as you want, you may end up serving once or twice or 3 times. But I tell you what, it would make a huge difference. Cody, who was in the back running sound for the live stream, is vacant. No one's running sound for the live stream because Cody had to run to Cozad to help them do that because we just don't have enough people to do that. See, it takes everyone's involvement to be a church for the next generation. May we carry the torch of this message and deliver to the next generation a healthy church for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of our nation. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you for the church. I have been deeply, deeply impacted by it. I have been saved from so much junk because of what I've been taught through my parents who were taught through the church. And Father, I pray that we would understand the ocean of Judeo-Christian values that we enjoy and we just kind of take for granted and maybe don't even understand. It's been passed down to us through the church. May we do a good job of passing it on to the next generation. I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.